If you're a part of the online anime community, I'm sure you will have heard people talk about a certain show from last season. During its runtime, it garnered a lot of attention and praise, some even going so far as to call it a modern classic. But is it really? I think we need to talk about one of the most talked about anime from the spring 2018 season, Megalobox. Megalobox is an anime produced by studio TMS Entertainment for the spring 2018 anime season. This 13-episode boxing anime was directed by Yo Moriyama, whose work mostly consists of key animation, where he's worked on series like The Woman Called Fujiko Mine and movies like Redline. But one of the things that made this series catch so many people's eye, including my own, was that it was advertised as a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the classic boxing manga Ashita no Joe, arguably one of the greatest sports manga or anime ever. So you can see why expectations for this anime would be high, and I'll get more into how Ashita no Joe and Megalobox are related later, but first let's talk about the plot of Megalobox. Megalobox is set in a futuristic city where licensed citizens live wealthy, while on the outskirts lies a slum town where the unlicensed citizens live in poverty. In this world, there's a popular sport known as megaloboxing, which is just like regular boxing, except the boxers wear something known as a gear, which makes their punches much more lethal. In the slum, we meet one of the unlicensed citizens, known as Junk Dog, or JD as I will refer to him from now on. JD makes his living as an underground megaloboxer, where he takes part in fixed boxing matches set up by his coach, Gansaku Nanbu. However, JD is getting tired of throwing matches. One day he runs into the head of the wealthy Shirato group, who also oversees the megaloboxing tournament, Yukiko Shirato, and her champion boxer, Yuri. Yuri and JD are stopped before they get into a scuffle, but Yuri shows up again to fight JD in the underground megaloboxing ring, and he beats him. This lights a fire in JD, who wants to enter the official megalobox tournament to once again get to fight Yuri. However, to enter the tournament, JD needs an official citizenship ID. Megalobox is a homage to the classic Ashita no Joe, like I said in the beginning. One of the ways that it wants to show this is in its animation and art style. The art is a lot more gritty, like older anime tends to be. Just look at Ashita no Joe. It's not exactly polished up, like most anime today are, but it's not just the art, it's also the animation. In order to give off the feel of a more classic anime, TMS Entertainment opted to animate Megalobox on cells, like they used to before the digital age rolled around. So as you can tell, they were really going for that older anime aesthetic. I think this was a cool move by TMS. I'm personally quite fond of the older aesthetic in anime, so seeing that it can still have a spot even in the modern landscape of animation was quite nice. That being said though, it's not like any and all shows should just decide to go back to cell animation. While I think cell animation certainly can have its own space in the industry, I don't think it should be the norm. There are a few distinct advantages to animating on cells, and as we can also see in Megalobox, there were sadly a few moments where the animation quality would drop in comparison to the rest of the series. Quality drops are nothing new to anime, but with digital animation there are certainly better ways to cover it up, more than there are when animating on cells. One of Megalobox's biggest strengths is in its music. There's a lot of variety in the soundtrack, like hard-hitting hip-hop beats, rap, acoustic music, and more emotional tunes, and they always seem to hit at more or less just the right moment. I especially like the use of rap in this show. Rap is obviously often more synonymous with minorities and people who have or are working their way up from the bottom, so it fit really nicely into this show. That being said, there is only so much music can do to improve a scene, even if you can use the music to add impact to a certain scene. If the writing doesn't hold up, the music won't really change much. Now we've come to the reason why I'm even making this video in the first place. If Megalobox is a modern day classic, it should be compared against another classic. And what better classic to compare it to than the very work it has been influenced by and is trying to celebrate. In this video, I'm gonna compare it to the anime of Ashita no Joe and not the manga, since I have not read the manga. So here we go. Obviously, with Megalobox being a celebration of Ashita no Joe, there will be quite a few similarities between the two shows. One of those similarities is the setting. They both take place in the slum. JD lives in the slum and is an underground megaloboxer, while Joe is a wandering problem youth who has left everything behind. Both JD and Joe are being trained by a former boxing coach. In JD's case, Nanbu is instructing JD to throw matches to make money for the mafia, while Joe's coach, Danpei, is a drunk who wants another shot at the pro leagues and wants Joe to beat his fighter. Both JD and Joe meet their respective rivals who they want to defeat, and end up becoming legitimate boxers in order to do so. JD's rival Yuri is backed by a huge company with ties to megaloboxing, just like Rikishi is in Ashita no Joe. There's also the slum kids hanging around in both series, though in Megalobox, only Sachio is really a part of it, while in Ashita no Joe, there's an entire gang of them. Another thing that's similar between Megalobox and Ashita no Joe is Megalobox's approach to the fights. Just like Joe, Megalobox tries to build up most of its fights. However, it would usually just do it in the same episode that it happened, whereas Ashita no Joe would spend quite a few episodes to set up the opponents Joe would fight and the circumstances surrounding the fight. This kind of thing has been a regular in sports anime ever since, and it goes to show just how important it is to get right. Megalobox tries to show us how Ashita no Joe would go about it, but ultimately fails to capture the same feeling as a proper build-up does. That's some of the similarities between the two shows, so where does Ashita no Joe and Megalobox differ? The biggest difference between the two are the lengths of their respective series. Megalobox is only 13 episodes in total, while Ashita no Joe had 2 seasons. Season 1 had 79 episodes, and Season 2 had 47, making it 126 episodes in total. Granted, the last 26 or so episodes of Season 1 were remade in Season 2. Other differences include obvious differences in characters. JD is already a boxer in his own right in Megalobox, but Joe is just a wild beast with a natural talent for fighting. Joe knows nothing about technique, and really doesn't care about boxing. He's also a much bigger problem child than JD is. Joe always acts cocky, always gets into fights, and pretends like no one can ever get him. This leads Joe to get in trouble with both the mafia and even the police. Danpei sees Joe as he's fighting some thugs and decides that he wants to use this boy to help him get himself back into the pro boxing ring. However, Joe wants nothing to do with anyone and keeps refusing any and all help, and keeps creating problems until Joe gets sent to juvie. It's in juvie where Joe meets who's gonna become his best friend and later sparring partner in Nishi, but also where he meets his biggest rival in Rikishi. Rikishi is a pro boxer who's serving time in juvie, and the only person who can defeat Joe. But not only defeat him, he knocks him out in a single punch. This motivates Joe to take up boxing in the form of learning basics through letters sent to him by Danpei. However, Rikishi ends up getting out before Joe manages to beat him, so Joe decides to get a pro boxing license in order to get to fight Rikishi again. While all of this is taking place, there's also a character who keeps appearing. Her name is Yoko Shiraiki, and she's the granddaughter of the owner of the Shiraiki Corporation. She also ends up running Shiraiki Boxing Gym and ends up becoming the owner of the company. So basically, she's Ashita no Joe's Yukiko Shirato. The difference between them though is that Yukiko from Megalobox can be seen as more of an antagonist type of character, while Yoko threads more of a middle ground. Yoko is very kind and polite. She tries to help where she can. She even gives candy to the poor kids in the slum. This makes Joe very angry though, because he sees her actions as selfish and that she doesn't actually care about the kids, but rather about her public appearance. Despite Joe's aggressiveness towards her, Yoko does tend to try to help Joe wherever it's possible, even if she ends up having to do so in secret. You've also got plenty of other smaller differences, like Noriko, the girl who works in the store and has a crush on Joe, as well as the gang of slum kids who follow Joe's journey and look up to him as a role model. But as you can tell, the biggest difference is that characters are a lot more fleshed out in Ashita no Joe. Now, that's to be expected as it has a lot more episodes to work with than Megalobox did. However, it's not like only Ashita no Joe did stuff differently than Megalobox. Megalobox had some differences in it as well. One of those differences was the introduction of gear, because in Megalobox, it's not just regular boxing, but megaloboxing, a much more lethal kind of sport. This is something the series tried to play to its advantage by upping the danger element. Joe ends up trying to gain enough popularity in 3 months to get to fight and beat strong opponents to rank up enough to get to fight for a place in the tournament. This is done by having him fight gearless against his opponents. You have also got the fact that Joe got a fake citizenship he needs in order to be able to fight for a spot in the Megalobox tournament through the Mafia. And they are only letting him and Nambu try to get to the Megalobox tournament in order to pay back their debt to the Mafia. But since we're back to talking Megalobox, let's get to my thoughts on that show in particular. As I stated earlier, the point of this video is to see if Megalobox is what some would refer to as a modern classic, and I'm doing that by comparing it to the classic that it's inspired by. But as you could probably tell, I don't think it is. For you see, the biggest issue for me when it comes to Megalobox is its length. Not to say that you can't tell a good story in 13 episodes, but more so because of the way Megalobox chooses to use its Ashita no Joe influences in its story. The way I would describe Megalobox is that it shows us the framework of what makes Ashita no Joe such a great story, without leaving much room for expanding on it and building. One of the things Ashita no Joe did so well was how it built everything up, from Joe's fights to the characters. Everything was given its proper time to breathe, and everyone could be expanded on. Megalobox shows glimpses of that, but due to its short length, it has no time to build, and it definitely has no time to breathe. The fights in Megalobox, although better animated than Joe's, carry way less of the impact that Joe's fights does. That is in part because they are not properly built up, but also because the way they play out and end are extremely similar to each other, and unsatisfying. Where Joe would do anything from struggle to come back and win, to absolutely destroy his opponents, JD on the other hand seems to most of the time be destroyed, only to turn it around at the end and win with a single punch. They keep that up all the way to the final fight, which is a bit different, but again, even the big climax ends up being a disappointment, as the fight is cut short and you learn in retrospect what happened in the final round. Joe's fight with his rival was both extremely well built up and breathtaking, and when the twist came into play, left you in shock. And even that was just to build on for the future. Now, I can see people saying that it is unfair to hold it against Megalobox, that the show it's influenced by did so much more considering the difference in length of the two shows. And to a point, I agree. But that is also part of the problem for me. There was never any way that Megalobox was going to be able to do a fraction of what Ashita no Joe did with only 13 episodes. So, in order to properly evaluate Megalobox, I think we need to look at it by itself. In my opinion, Megalobox is an okay show. However, it's also a show that seemingly wants to accomplish a lot more than it had the time to. It wants to give nods to a great show while also telling its own story, but ends up not really being able to do either particularly well. Megalobox was made to be a celebration of Ashita no Joe, but in the end, the weight of that name was too much for Megalobox to handle.